The throne room of Kael'mor was cold, even in summer. The stone walls had seen too many years of war councils and punishments to hold any warmth. Torches burned along the sides, but their light never seemed to reach the corners. King Draven Ashgrove sat on his throne with one leg crossed over the other, watching the guards drag a young woman into the center of the room. She did not fight them. She did not cry out. She simply walked, her head slightly bowed, until she reached the space where prisoners always knelt. Her name was Ren. She was an Omega, one of the quiet ones, the kind who worked in the kitchens or the laundry, and were never seen unless something had gone wrong. Today, something had gone wrong. A noble's son had accused her of stealing a ring, though no one had actually seen her take it. "Look at me," Draven said. Ren lifted her eyes just enough to see his boots, then let them fall again. A few of the court members laughed quietly. They were used to this game. The king enjoyed testing the Omegas who came before him, seeing how long it took before they broke down and begged for mercy. Most of them cried within minutes. Some fainted. None of them ever stayed silent for long. But 3 years had passed since Ren first came to serve in the castle, and in all that time, no one had heard her say a single word. Not when she burned her hand on a kitchen pot. Not when the healers set her broken wrist without warning. Not even when the other servants teased her for being strange. Draven found this fact more interesting than the missing ring. 3 years, he said, rising from his throne. He walked down the steps slowly, the way a man walks when he already knows he holds all the power in the room. 3 years, and you have never once spoken. Not a single word to anyone. Do you think that makes you special? Ren said nothing. Most Omegas cry when they meet me, he continued, circling her now, his voice light and mocking. Some beg, some faint before I even finish a sentence. But you, he stopped in front of her, tilting his head as if studying an interesting insect. You just kneel there, staring at the floor like it holds all the answers. The court laughed again, softer this time, waiting to see what their king would do next. Tell me, Draven said, crouching down so his eyes were level with hers. Is this discipline, or is there simply nothing left inside you worth saying? Ren's hands, folded neatly in her lap, tightened. Her knuckles turned pale, but her face stayed calm. Nothing to say, Draven repeated, almost to himself. He stood back up, already losing interest, already thinking of the next matter on his list for the day. How disappointing. I was hoping for a challenge. He turned his back to her, his robe sweeping across the stone floor as he began to walk away. Then, from behind him, a small voice broke the silence of the throne room. Corwin. The word landed like a stone, dropped into still water. For a moment, nobody moved. Even the torches seemed to flicker with less certainty. Draven froze mid-step. His shoulders went rigid. Slowly, he turned around to face the kneeling girl, his expression no longer amused. What did you say? His voice had lost its mocking edge. It was quiet now, almost afraid. Ren lifted her head fully for the first time since she had entered the room. Her eyes, which had always seemed dull and distant to the guards who watched her, were now sharp and steady, fixed directly on the king. Corwin, she said again, her voice trembling but clear. That is the name your mother called you, before the fever took her. Before everyone was told that the little prince had died with her. A murmur spread through the court, quiet whispers that grew louder with every second. Nobody in Kael'mor knew that name. Nobody except the very few who had been present the night the old queen died. And all of them, as far as anyone knew, were long gone. Draven's jaw tightened. You are lying, he said, though his voice cracked slightly on the last word. That name died with her. Everyone who knew it is dead. Not everyone, Ren said. Her hands were shaking now, the calm mask she had worn for 3 years finally beginning to crumble. I was 7 years old. I hid behind the curtains in the queen's chamber the night she passed. I watched the guards carry a boy's body out in a cart, wrapped so no one could see his face. I watched them bury the wrong child in a grave meant for a prince. The room had gone completely silent. Even the courtiers who usually whispered behind their hands were too stunned to make a sound. Why would you say this now? Draven asked, though something in his tone suggested he already feared the answer. Because I have carried it for 9 years, Ren said. The last time I spoke your real name out loud, 3 people who heard me disappeared within a week. I was young, but I understood. I learned to stop talking, not just about your name, but about everything. It was safer to say nothing at all than to risk saying the wrong thing. Draven's legs felt unsteady beneath him. Slowly, without meaning to, he lowered himself to one knee, then the other, until the king of Kalemore was kneeling on the same floor where prisoners always knelt before him. "You cannot be telling the truth," he whispered, though his eyes were already searching her face for proof. "Look closely," Ren said gently. "You already know I am." And when he looked, really looked, he saw it. The shape of her eyes, tilted slightly at the corners, was the same shape his mother's eyes had been in the one portrait he had never allowed anyone to remove from the palace walls. It was a small detail, one that most people would never notice, but Draven had spent years staring at that portrait, memorizing every line of his mother's face, because it was the only piece of her he had left. "How," he managed to say, "did you end up here? In my castle? Serving in my kitchens?" "I did not plan it," Ren said. "After that night my family fled the capital. We lived quietly in a small village for years, until my parents passed and I had nowhere else to go. I came here because Kalemore was the only place I remembered as home, even if it no longer felt safe. I never expected to see you. When I did, I recognized you instantly, though you looked so different, so much colder than the boy I remembered." Draven's throat tightened. He thought of all the years he had spent building walls around himself, convincing everyone, including himself, that the frightened child who once cried at his mother's bedside had been completely erased. He had worked so hard to become someone untouchable, someone who could never be hurt again. And yet here he was, kneeling in front of an Omega he had mocked only minutes earlier, undone by 2 words spoken in a trembling voice. "Why did you never tell me?" he asked. "In 3 years, you must have seen me. You must have known who I was." "I was afraid," Ren admitted. "Afraid that if I spoke, the same thing that happened to those men would happen to me. Afraid that speaking your true name would put both of us in danger. So I stayed silent. I told myself it was safer this way, for both of us." "Then why speak now?" Draven asked. "Why choose this moment, in front of the entire court?" Ren looked down at her hands before answering. "Because I could not watch you mock the last piece of your own past without knowing it. I could not let you continue believing there was truly nothing left to find in silence. Sometimes silence is not empty. Sometimes it is simply waiting for the right moment to be broken." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The court around them remained frozen, unsure of what they were witnessing, unsure of what to do with a king kneeling before an Omega he had humiliated only moments before. Slowly, Draven reached out and took Ren's folded hands in his own. His fingers trembled slightly, something none of his advisors had ever seen from him before. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for keeping it safe. For keeping me safe, even when I gave you no reason to." Ren offered him a small, tired smile. "You were a good boy once. Kind, even. I always hoped that boy was still somewhere inside the king everyone feared." Draven closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 9 years settle over him at once. 9 years of pretending to be someone made of stone. 9 years of believing that nobody remembered the child he used to be, the child who had lost everything in a single night and been forced to become someone else entirely just to survive. When he opened his eyes again, something in his expression had softened, though the strength in his gaze remained. He rose to his feet slowly, then reached down to help Ren stand as well. The court watched in stunned silence as their king, known throughout the kingdom for his coldness, helped a servant girl to her feet with something close to gentleness in his hands. "From this day forward," Draven announced, his voice carrying through the throne room with new authority, "no one in this court will question the silence of Ren, nor accuse her falsely of any crime. She will be given a place of honor within these walls, and anyone who threatens her safety will answer directly to me." The court members exchanged confused glances, but none dared to argue. Whatever had just happened between their king and the quiet Omega was clearly beyond anything they could understand, and none of them wished to test his patience further. As the guards dispersed, and the court slowly returned to its usual business, Draven remained standing close to Ren, unwilling to let go of the connection they had just found after so many years apart. "There is much I need to hear," he said quietly, about everything that happened after that night. About my mother's final days, about how you survived all these years alone. And there is much I need to hear as well, Ren replied, about the boy who became a king, and about how he lost his way. Draven allowed himself a small, rare smile. It seems we both have stories worth telling. Then perhaps, Ren said, her voice steadier now than it had been in years, it is time we both stopped staying silent. Outside the throne room, the sun continued its slow climb across the sky, unaware of the quiet revolution that had just taken place within those ancient stone walls. A king who had built his entire identity around control and distance had been brought to his knees by two simple words, spoken by someone he had never once suspected of holding such power. And for the first time in 9 years, Draven Ashgrove felt something other than the weight of his crown. He felt, however faintly, the beginning of something that almost resembled hope. As the last of the courtiers filed out, and the great doors closed behind them, Ren remained standing beside the king, no longer bound by the silence that had protected her for so long. The castle of Kael'mor, with all its cold stone and old secrets, suddenly felt a little less empty than it had that morning. Whatever came next, whatever truth still waited to be uncovered between them, one thing had already changed forever. The silent Omega had finally found her voice, and the Alpha King, who once mocked her, had discovered that the truth he feared most was also the truth that could finally set him free.